That's right, I teach philosophy at Rutgers University, and when people hear that I'm a philosopher, they often say, oh, what's your philosophy? And I always think that people have this impression that a philosopher is what lay people often imagine it to be, which is somebody who has big, complicated theories expressed in dense prose. In fact, though, more often than not, the disciplined philosophers, what we try to do is we try to limit ourselves to what can be demonstrated against the best arguments on the opposing side. Or as I tell my students, I don't think that I have all the answers or even any of the answers, but I do have a lot of questions. I got into philosophy partly because of, or actually to a significant extent, because of reading books by Martin Gardner. Like many of you, I started with some of his books on mathematics. Mathematical Magic Show was one of my first, and then I moved on. Unlike many others here who seem to have gone into mathematics, I got really interested in the book he wrote, Fads and Fallacies in the Name of Science. In that book, he addresses the demarcation problem. What is it that distinguishes pseudoscience from genuine science? And I think now that there's a very similar problem. What distinguishes pseudo-philosophy from genuine philosophy? And Gardner's answers to these questions, to the pseudoscience question, I think also works well for the pseudo-philosophy question. Here's a great quote. The pseudoscientist often has a tendency to write in a complex jargon, in many cases making use of terms and phrases he himself has coined. Schizophrenics sometimes talk in what psychiatrists call neologisms, words which have meaning to the patient but sound like Jabberwocky to everyone else. And elsewhere at the beginning of the book, Gardner says, a renaissance of German quasi-science paralleled the rise of Hitler. If the German people had been better trained to distinguish good from bad science, would they have swallowed so easily the insane racial theories of the Nazi anthropologists? Now, this may seem like hyperbolizing, abstract speculation on the part of Gardner, but in fact, he knows what he is speaking of. And the most important philosopher who influenced Gardner was Rudolf Carnap, who in fact lived originally under the Nazis. He was a member, in fact, a dominant member of the Vienna Circle, which was the origin of logical positivism, which again followed this idea that we need to pare down philosophy and get rid of stuff that we can't clearly state and demonstrate, which was opposed to the Nazi philosophy. There in fact was a conference of Nazi philosophy at the time. The Nazi philosophers, the continental philosophers who went after Nazism, were strongly opposed to the logical positivists. Luckily, Carnap was able to leave. The head of the Vienna Circle was not so lucky, and one of his students, that philosopher's students who turned to Nazism, ended up killing the head of the Vienna Circle. Carnap taught classes at the University of Chicago, and Gardner said that Carnap's lectures were the most important he had ever taken, and he in fact edited a set of Carnap's lectures, which became a seminal textbook in philosophy, which is called An Introduction to the Philosophy of Science. So following all this up, I started thinking maybe my life's goal should be to try to spread reason and good reasoning to people, to teach people the tools of good reasoning as opposed to bad reasoning, because since we all try to be as reasonable as we can, if given the tools to distinguish true from bad or good from bad reasoning, wouldn't we all take it? Bertrand Russell started thinking so, and then he said, it has been said that man is a rational animal. All my life I've been searching for evidence which could support this, because as it turns out, we tend to come to our conclusions, especially on big sociopolitical and religious and other issues, on the basis of what leads to our own benefit, partly on the basis of what social group we happen to belong to. Bertrand Russell was a great philosopher. Robert Heinlein was not a philosopher, but I think he put it very well. Man is not a rational animal, he is a rationalizing animal. I know many people who are quite rational almost all the time. I know some people who are rational some of the time. I know some people who are never rational, but I have never met somebody who is unable to rationalize, who is unable to take, to interpret evidence in order to support some pre-established theory. So the question for me is, how could I teach people the tools of reasoning without accidentally teaching them just to rationalize? And here's my final slide, this is from a story about one of my courses called Logic, Reason, and Persuasion that I teach at Rutgers. The students here, first of all, fill out a survey on all kinds of hot-button issues, and then I put together teams made up of students who strongly disagree with each other on those issues. And they have to come up with not arguments on one side or the other of those issues, but both sides, and they have to argue against each other. And what they're presenting in the background here is tables of arguments in which they have presented all the arguments they can think of for one side and all the objections they can think of, and so on. And they have to work together against other teams that are similarly constituted. So the only way you can succeed is by listening very carefully to the people who disagree with you, and those people become your friends because you normally become friends with those you work with, which means you listen more carefully to them. And oddly enough, many of the people in my classes have become very close friends with people whose views are diametrically opposed just because of the fun of arguing back and forth against other people. I thought I was going to go over, and I still have 20 seconds left, so I just wanted to show you the ways in which Martin Gardner's books have led me to an interesting place in life that might be a little different from what is normally presented here. So thank you for your attention.